Welcome back to the class. We are beginning our discussion about Louis Dumont and his classic work Homo Hierarchicus. A very important, very provocative, very fascinating work, which it will not be an exaggeration to say that which revolutionized Indian sociological endeavor to understand the caste system, because the framework was different. Louis Dumont was not an Indian sociologist, he is a French sociologist. So he, through his work, through the introduction of a structuralist perspective, he kind of significantly questioned the existing scholarship in India on caste system. So it created quite a lot of reverberations, quite a lot of discussions and debates within Indian sociological scenario. And he established a very important prestigious journal, Contributions to Indian Sociology, with a Pocock. And he set the tone for a very different kind of sociology to be practiced in India. So we are spending some more time, maybe 4 lectures on Dumont and Homo Hierarchicus. It's a very elaborate discussion on Homo Hierarchicus. And before that, let's see who the person was. And this is one of the pictures of Louis Dumont, and one of the titles of the cover pages of his work, Homo Hierarchicus, the caste system and its implication. And it's in English edition. And Homo Hierarchicus was first written in French, and after some 4 years it was published in I think 1966 it was written in French, and in 1970s it was first made available, it was translated and first made available to English language. And not a very easy book, not easy in terms of the language used, not easy in terms of the way of argument, its writing style, the structure of the book. It was all very, very new, and it created ripples in the Indian academic scenario. And and it was criticized vehemently. It was celebrated by a lot of people. It was appreciated for its very incisive insights. It was criticized, and then it was severely criticized for its inherent biases. But any scholar, any student of caste system, any student of Indian society cannot be oblivious to this particular work, or they cannot dismiss Homo Hierarchicus, or they cannot dismiss Dumont, because his contribution is something so monumental. Because as I mentioned, he rewrote the way in which Indian society in general and caste system in particular was understood. So these are some of his important works. His works include Homo Hierarchicus. It's a French name, and from Mandeville to Marx, the genesis and triumph of economic ideology. And another book which is again written in France, which if translated, or the translated name means Essays on Individualism and Anthropological Perspectives on Modern Ideologies, in which he contrasts holism with individualism. Okay, so he was a French scholar. Okay, basically tried to communicate with the French people, and especially this book Homo Hierarchicus is basically, he has kept the French audience in mind, and this book is written for them. That's very, very interesting. We'll discuss that. So through this presentation, I depend mostly on T.N. Madan's summary and elaboration of Louis Dumont. So almost every material that I use in these PowerPoints are taken from this essay, Louis Dumont and the Study of Society in India. And this essay has appeared in multiple volumes. And the one which I have taken is from his book Pathways, which I have mentioned in the previous class. Pathways is a book which is written by T.N. Madan, which chronicles the pathways of Indian sociology. So he has elaborate essays on Srinivas, on D.P. Mukherjee, on Louis Dumont. So this essay is it's a very interesting introductory essay that kind of summarizes Louis Dumont, because Homo Hierarchicus is not a very easily accessible book. It's not considered to be a very easy book, unlike, say, Remembered Village that we discussed. Remembered Village was, as I told you several times, it was a very easy reading, novel-like book with vivid descriptions about a singular village, and the writing style also was very, very engaging. Whereas Homo Hierarchicus is more dense, more theoretical, its approach was unorthodox. So T.N. Madan proceeds to give you a kind of a chapter-wise summary in this essay, and of course then ends with criticism. So T.N. Madan and his essay is the most important source for me. Now he is a scholar of international renown who is equally at home in the domains of sociology, social anthropology and Indology. The subjects on which he has written have an impressive range and include Hinduism, caste, kinship, marriage, kingship in ancient India and social political movements in modern India. So Dumont was a structuralist. Okay, he did extensive ethnographic work. He collected material from Tamil Nadu. The colors were one of his major important the caste which he studied, Malay colors, and so he was adept in terms of doing ethnographic work, and he was also an expert in Indology. Okay, so he had enormous command over Sanskrit, and he also used the data, okay, from the field. Now this is something quite interesting, because you see when we look into the trajectory of different approaches, the earliest approach was what we call it as this Indological approach, okay, which heavily favored the text or the Sanskrit language or the material that are written in Sanskrit language. And these Indologists never cared about what the field data means. I am talking about people, not a host of armchair theorists or the typical Sanskrit scholars, both foreign and Indian, who relied only on the ancient scriptures or the Sanskrit text basically to understand Indian society and to say that these books hold the key to understanding the Indian society. Okay, and G.S. Gurey is an interesting combination of both. Okay, he did empirical work, he collected data, but he was also a Sanskritist. And after Indology, when we come to say a Marxist framework, they have least regard for anything that is connected with the old text. Okay, so they completely deny that, and their focus is on the material dimension, on the economic dimensions of society. And when it comes to structural functionalist, okay, they are again coming from the social anthropological tradition. They also kind of neglected the Indological or the Sanskrit text, and rather they kind of privileged the field data. Okay, and Srinivas is the best example. Maybe his understanding of knowledge about Indian scriptures could be very peripheral. Okay, he was not a Sanskrit scholar. Of course, he might have been able to read and understand it, but he was not, he himself did not consider as a Sanskrit scholar. His expertise was not in the analysis of the ancient texts or other things, but rather he advocated the kind of a field view. I hope you remember this book view and field view. And Srinivas presents it as a kind of a binary, as an opposite between book view and field view, and Srinivas always preferred the field view. And the essay that we discussed, this Varna and Caste, is an excellent example about how he argues that the book view can be misleading. The Varna scheme of Indian society is, Varna scheme of Indian caste system is very misleading, rather the field work is something important. And when it comes to structuralism, or when it comes to say people like Louis Dumont, you see a very interesting combination of both. Okay, so Dumont heavily depends on Sanskrit texts, and he also makes use of data. Okay, so methodologically, it is a rejection of mere empirical approach, and it is also a combination of both the Indological as well as structural functionalist, Indological and empirical approach. Okay, they don't dismiss Dumont and other scholars. They don't dismiss the empirical approach, but they argue empirical method or empirical data is not alone. Okay, you need to make use of empirical method, or in other words, they would argue that the empirical data will begin to make sense only when you understand the kind of a deeper structure in which they are implicated. And these deeper structures, they say, you get it from the ancient texts, or the ancient text, they hide, or they exhibit the ancient, the deeper structures, and the empirical data that you collect would only illuminate that. So this is a very, very important methodological intervention. So Dumont is somebody who intervened decisively in the theoretical as well as methodological aspect of Indian society in general and caste in particular. And he was a founder of Contributions to Indian Sociology, established in 1957, and as I mentioned, it still continues to be the most important, sociological journal in sociology published from India. And later he worked along with Pocock to fulfill that, to establish that, and later they stopped the publication, and then a host of others, including T.N. Madan, took over the publication of this journal, because that was seen as a very, very important journal, exhibiting the scholarship on Indian society. So they started it as a new series later. So the fundamental argument of Dumont, the reason why it was titled as Contributions to Indian Sociology, was that the argument that you need to have a sociology for India, sociology of India. Okay, so Dumont was unconvinced or unhappy with the way in which Indian society was theorized, and he believed that Indian society is somewhat unique and it needs to be explained on its own merit. Okay, and many of the concepts that are used from West or used from other places might be inadequate to understand Indian society. So the primary claim or the primary intent was to create a sociology of India. What appeals to me most was not only the acknowledgement that the people being studied might have points of view, but also, in fact, more so the affirmation that these points of view, the principles that the people themselves give must be taken seriously and even treated as fruitful points of departure of anthropological enquiry. Okay, this is something quite important. So he argued that what appeals to me most, this is Dumont's own sentence. Okay, this is quoted in Madan's essay, but it is his own quotation. What appeals to me most was not only acknowledgement that the people being studied might have points of view, but also, in fact, more so affirmation that these points of view, the principle that the people themselves give, must be taken seriously and even treated as fruitful points of departures for anthropological enquiry. So he was of the opinion that many times the ethnographers or the anthropologists come from outside with a preconceived theoretical framework, and then they use the people's reactions and then argument and the ethnographic data only to explain their own position, only these frameworks. And they were less receptive to people's own stories, okay, people's own points of views. Or there was a reluctance, according to Dumont, there was a reluctance among anthropologists to give kind of more seriousness or more credence to the arguments of people about their own life. Okay, the way in which people explain their own life was seen as a kind of an ignorant expression about themselves, and it required an expert like an anthropologist from outside to tell people that, okay, what you are experiencing is this. So he had a very serious ideological and intellectual problem with that kind of a tendency within anthropology. So Dumont and Pocock had at the same time pointed out the distinctiveness of anthropologists' method lay in attempting to see things from within as integrated in the society which he studies and from without, that is, as a collective representation as well as social facts. Now, interestingly, Dumont also is not somebody who would think that the people know everything about their own society. Okay, see, so there are two extremes. One extreme is your general suspicion or general idea that, okay, people do not know what and how they live. You need an explanation, you need an expert opinion to say that. Other extreme would be to say that, okay, the way people tell about their society, the way people understand society is the reality, and you go by that. Okay, and as a sociologist or as an anthropologist, your duty is to reproduce whatever the native people say, and then that is what the reality, or that is what the knowledge production means. So Dumont and Pocock were not happy with either of these positions, especially the former, because that was the most prominent one. He argued that, or they argued that, that the distinctiveness of the anthropological method lie in the attempt to see things from within as integrated in the society which he studied and from without. So he argued that you need to pay attention to see how people make sense of their own life, okay, to take it seriously. So whatever insights that you gather from here, it is important, and also that is you need to understand how the society work, a kind of an insight from outside. And this insight from outside is mostly his understanding about structural foundation of every society. So that is why where he brings in the structuralism. So when he begins to study Indian society, Dumont would argue that the way in which Indian society exists, whether it's caste system or kinship system or kingship system, all these things need to be studied, but these things must be supplemented by the larger, deeper structuralist understanding of society, which is which is available only to him as an expert in this particular field. So he believed a combination of both the knowledge from within and the knowledge from without. Homo Hierarchicus was published first in French in 1966 and later translated into English in 1970s. And even this very term is very interesting. It's Homo Hierarchicus, and you might be immediately reminded of similar terms, isn't it? Homo sapiens, Homo Neanderthalensis. These are all terms that are used for indicating different species, and then Homo fabe. So there are so many different terminologies used basically to describe the entire human species as a whole. Okay, Homo sapiens is a term used to give a very specific definition to human being, and Homo fabe is another term that is used to give us another specific definition to human beings. So for Dumont, this Homo Hierarchicus is something to say that this hierarchy is a very, very constitutive, is a central theme of human beings, and that is the reason why he titled his book as Homo Hierarchicus and not Homo Equalis. Okay, Homo Equalis is the argument that human beings are all equal. The very famous French Revolution, the very famous argument that every human being is equal to one another. Okay, even though we know that it is only an utopian idea. On the contrary, Dumont is building up the argument, or Dumont is arguing that the very essential nature of human society is Homo Hierarchicus. One of the refrains of Dumont in this book is that the Western scholars' definition of caste as a type of social stratification is ethnocentric. They must therefore liberate themselves from their preconceived ideas such as egalitarianism, individualism, and preeminence of politics and economics in society by which they are trapped. So, as I mentioned, this book Homo Hierarchicus was written keeping the French audience in mind. So, his very first chapter, the introductory chapter, is a kind of a dialogue with the French people, saying that, okay, we are, because we are French, we think that equality is one of the fundamental features of society, and we believe in individualism, we believe in equality, we believe in rights, okay, but all these things might give you, provide you with a very skewed understanding of a human society, and you also need to understand other values. Okay, so if equality is a value, then he argues that then hierarchy is also another value. Okay, you don't understand the value of equality if you don't understand the value of hierarchy. There are societies in which hierarchy is also an integral structural value, and very important value. Okay, so in order to understand hierarchy, in order to understand equality, you need to understand hierarchy. So he argues that every society, especially the French society, must appreciate other competing values, and he argues that many of the theorizations used in sociology and anthropology are Eurocentric and ethnocentric. And ethnocentric is a basic concept in sociology which tells you that you tend to formulate your own ideas on the basis of the concepts on the basis of your own value orientations. Okay, so you are not able to say something like the vegetarian people looking down upon non-vegetarian people. It's an ethnocentric approach. you think that vegetarian food is superior, and thereby you form opinion that everybody who consumes non-vegetarian food are inferior. That's an example of ethnocentric, or white people believing that all people of colors are inferior people. And when it comes to Europe, you know that most of the social sciences, especially sociology and anthropology, was founded in Europe. So most of the theorizations within European sociology are Eurocentric. They were derived from the very specific socio-cultural and historical context of Europe as a whole. Okay, so his argument that one of the refrains of Dumont in this book is that the Western scholars' definition of caste as a type of social stratification is ethnocentric. So he was very much critical of the British scholars or the Western scholars' characterization of caste system as stratification. Okay, and stratification is a system in which people are people are placed in different strata with a notion of inferiority and superiority. It's a vertical stratification. Okay, so the people on the top are always considered to be privileged, and people at the bottom are always at a disadvantageous position. So this involves very specific notions of inequality, then suppression, then exploitation, and a host of other things. And this is how caste system was understood when the Britishers came in. They understood it as a very brutal and inhuman way of treating other humans, even though they were practicing slavery there. So there was a series of attempts by the colonial government to mitigate these these inhuman practices and practice of untouchability and discriminations and other things. So Srinivas says that this tendency to look at caste only as a system of stratification is very myopic. It is very, very superficial. Rather, it is much more deeper. So they must therefore liberate themselves from their preconceived ideas such as egalitarianism, individualism, and preeminence of politics and economics in society by which they are trapped. So he argues that an average scholar of sociology or anthropology from the West is completely trapped in the idea that egalitarianism must be the most important value for every society, and every society individually is the most important element, not the collectivity. And for every society, the utilitarian dimensions of economics and politics is the most important one, not the ideas and the religion. Okay, so he's making that argument very clear. He's scolding or he's reprimanding the British scholar or the Western anthropologists and sociologists being ethnocentric in their approach. So caste, which undoubtedly stands for inequality in theory as well as in practice, should not be interpreted as a notion which is the opposite of equality, and therefore an anomaly or worse, a perversion. The inequality of caste system is a special type of inequality, and the sociologist's principal task is to lay bare its nature. So this is again quote by Dumont. Okay, so he argues that caste, which undoubtedly stands for inequality. Okay, it's a kind of inequality because that caste system comprises of different, as we have discussed in the case of Gurye, caste system immediately accompanies exclusions, different forms of privileges and restrictions on different people on the basis of their birth. Their access to public services and then food and other things are restricted, jobs and everything are restricted. So it is undoubtedly connected with inequality in theory as well as in practice. Okay, in practice, but it should not be interpreted as a notion which is opposite of equality. So caste system should not be seen as a mere opposition of inequality and therefore an anomaly or a worse, as a perversion of society. Okay, so caste system, he says, must be understood in its own right. There is an inner logic behind the way in which Indian society is arranged in a specific manner, in difference to the way in which other societies are arranged. So there are certain reasons and logics and rationale behind that, and the task of an anthropologist or a sociologist is not to condemn all these practices or to brand all these practices as uncivilized or unequal and other things and to dismiss it, rather to try to intellectually try to understand how it works or what are the inner logic behind this particular system. So therefore an anomaly or worse, as a perversion. The inequality of caste system is a special type of inequality, and the sociologist's principal task is to lay bare its nature. So the inequality, Dumont agrees that caste system represents a kind of an inequality. Okay, but this inequality is something very different, and it is important for a sociologist to make sense of that. Okay, again a quote from the book Homo Hierarchicus. The idea which that means the people express are related to each other by more fundamental ideas, even though these are unexpressed. Fundamental ideas literally go without saying and have no need to be distinct, that is tradition. Only their corollaries are explicit. The caste system, for example, appears as perfectly coherent theory once one adds the necessary but implicit links to the principle that these people themselves give. A very, very powerful argument. So, what is he saying? He is saying that for every society, the most fundamental principles are not explicitly stated. Okay, the most fundamental principles are not explicitly articulated. They go without saying. Okay, you don't need to reinforce them, you don't need to re-articulate them, you don't need to restate them, you don't need to remind people about that. So, the most fundamental things go unarticulated, unannounced. The ideas which people express are related to each other by more fundamental ideas, even though they are unexpressed. So, for Dumont, the most fundamental ideas of every society are lying deep hidden, deep buried in their thing, which may not find its own expression in the outside world. Okay, fundamental ideas literally go without saying and have no need to be distinct, that is tradition. Okay, only their corollaries are explicit. So, only the way in which certain elements of them need to come out and then make themselves bare, make themselves visible to others. Okay, the caste system, for example, appears as a perfectly coherent theory once one adds the necessary but implicit link to the principles that the people themselves give. So, if you look into the way in which a caste society work, Dumont would argue that there are specific rules and regulations. Okay, there are specific obligations, there are specific rules, there are certain specific ways in which people are arranged in a way. There are notions of superiority, inferiority, there are elaborate rules and everything. So, for Dumont, these rules themselves are not sufficient to understand. Rather, these rules are only reflections of a much deeper, larger structure. And how people interpret their own experience, how people understand their own society are only indicative of a much larger structure that lie beneath, okay, that lie behind these observable things. And caste system is an excellent example, the way Levi-Strauss looked at say mythology or kinship. Now, Dumont is also proposing to look into these things by trying to go deeper into that. I think we will stop the class here and then we will meet for the next class. It will be a continuation. I think we will have 2 more classes specifically on this book, and I think this introduction may be sufficient for today's class, and we will continue with the discussion in the coming class. Thank you.